Freedom. Why is it important? And what does it mean? Can you imagine living in a world where you wear the label of freedom but are separated based on the color of your skin? Well, this was the world for African Americans during the 1950s in many southern states. I know you're wondering, how could a nation founded on religious freedom, the idea that all men are created equal and everyone should have life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness? Well, to be honest, there is no answer or justification, but what is important is how it all changed. Martin Luther King Jr. was one of the most influential people in United States history. If it was not for him, there is no telling what our world would look like today. He was the leader of the Civil Rights Movement, and one of the key victories that led to this was the Montgomery bus boycotts. My group and I are going to tell you of the boycott's events.
Martin Luther King acted upon his idea by getting involved in the local activities, groups. For example, he joined the local branch of the NAACP and the Alabama Caucus on the Human Relations. He brought together the leaders of other groups such as Eddie Nelson from the Progressive Democrats, Rufus Nevius from the Citizen Committees, and Miss Marys Fairbanks and John Anna Robinson from the Women's Political Council. He got these leaders and their groups to put aside their difference and share their views to come to the common agreeable goal. By doing this, King eventually went on to form the Montgomery Improvement Association. Without this group, the bus boycott would have never survived. The foundation that united the black community was the arrest of Rosa Parks. Rosa Parks was a well-respected woman of the community. She was arrested for refusing to give up her seat to a white male. She was later found guilty of breaking the segregation laws and fined $10, and the court cost $14. Rosa Parks was not the first woman to be arrested for this crime. The 15-year-old Calvin was arrested 8 months previous for the same exact thing, but she was not as good a candidate to build a movement around. The arrest for Rosa Parks was one of the most significant events for the Montgomery bus boycotts.
Wall Street Baptist Church was the beginning place for the Montreal bus boycott. Reverend Roy Bennett began the meeting of what became the International Ministry for planning the boycott. More than 40 people showed up to the meeting, including physicians, school teachers, lawyers, businessmen, postal workers, and union leaders, and a large majority group of Christians. Bennett started the meeting stating, "This is no time to talk, this is time for action." And although this was taken differently and caused some commotion, over time they finally took their role. December 5th, the boycott began and was underway. Martin Luther King projected that only 60% would be participating in it, but he was surprised as it turned out to be 100%. As the white leaders were trying to find ways to stop the boycott by either taxes or lying, the African Americans held strong until their 3 requests were fulfilled. And those 3 requests were courteous treatment by the bus operators, the first come, first serve policy, and for African Americans that meant they started from the back to the front, and for white people it was front to the back. And African American bus drivers were hired for primarily African American routes. And to finding their success, the nonviolent boycott was a success.
For the first few days, they had depended on the Negro taxi companies who had agreed to transport the people for the same 10 cents fare that they paid on on the buses. However, the first negotiation meeting that was held with the city commission said that there was a law that limited the taxis to a minimum fare. King knew that this would stop the taxis from assisting in the protests. When that happened, King remembered when his friend in Louisiana set up a private carpool. That night, they had a mass meeting where King asked who will be willing to offer their cars and to give them their address, telephone numbers, and hours that they could drive before leaving the meeting. The response was tremendous. More than 150 signed slips volunteered a few hours before and after work. Even the ministers offered to drive whenever they were needed. The next day, just like King predicted, the police issued an order to all the cab companies reminding them that by law, they had to charge a minimum fare of 54 cents. That was the end of the cheap taxi service, and that's how the carpool began.
During the bus boycotts, the Alabama government and opposing whites created many challenges for the MIA and their cause. The White Citizens Council fought very hard for segregation. They used the legal maneuvers of interposition and nullification. Some actions extended beyond the law, with methods of terror, brutal intimidation, threats of starvation. Some of these examples are when the bus boycott started. Some white employers threatened to fire employees who partook in the bus boycott, or anyone who supported it for that matter. Insurance companies dropped coverage for any of those African Americans who were involved in the carpool system. Letters and phone calls of threats were sent to the leaders of the MIA. Messages were spread trying to divide the black community against Martin Luther King and other MIA leaders. The press even released a false story that the boycott was over to try to get blacks back on the buses. When a resolution had tried to be made, attorney Jack Crenshaw explained that any compromise would violate the city ordinance of the segregation laws. After all efforts failed, the government and police officials came forward with a get tough policy. These involved arresting blacks for petty things that were not even crimes, such as standing around on the streets or minor traffic violations. Things even escalated further by acts of terror, such as bombings of the MIA leaders' homes and churches. It was these very crazy acts that made the evil of segregation so transparent. This is why it was so important for the bus boycott and the African American protests to be nonviolent. Hate begets hate, and love begets love.
Pick yourself up, you can walk a free man. Liberate